Coming up, all eyes were on this legendary band after they released their megalithic fourth album. Championed by many as the greatest rock record ever written. Everybody was clamoring for a sequel to this one, but they wouldn't get it. Instead, this band took a sharp left turn into unexplored territory. They kicked out a bold collection of songs that tapped into a diverse selection of genres. The rock press, they eviscerated them for it. But time would prove that they knew exactly what they were doing. An essential entry into the compendium of rock, this album, it also boasts today's featured song. Telling you, we're zeroing in on a haunting masterpiece here. Written by the band's most underrated member, this foreboding track, it's a work of sheer genius, and it will engulf your very soul. It was also part of a cutthroat moment when two of the members reunited, leaving him out while naming their project after this song, his song. Find out the story coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you remember racing Hot Wheels cars against your friends when you were growing up, you're going to dig this channel of deep musical nostalgia. Make sure to subscribe below right now, click the red button, click the bell. I know you'll dig this channel. We have interviews and stories from the greatest songs of all time. Also, check us out on Patreon. There you'll find exclusive content. You can even become an honorary producer to help us curate this music history. Very important. It helps us to keep it a daily channel. I love this song. So going into the creation of their fourth album, Led Zeppelin had amassed a stockpile of completed and still in the works songs, including several tracks that wouldn't make the cut. Actually, there was enough material beyond the Elite 8 that did make it to fill an additional record. There was Down by the Seaside, Night Flight, Poor Time, Boogie with Stu, The Rover, and Hey Hey What Can I Do? They were all waiting in the wings. And notably for today's episode, so was another track that John Paul Jones was hard at work putting together. A song that I've received more requests than any other Zeppelin song to cover on here. It's today's featured song. It's the magnificent No Quarter. A very moody and atmospheric prog rock keyboard track. No Quarter would be one of John Paul Jones' finest contributions to the band, and that's saying something. A truly ethereal masterpiece. Let's set this thing up. Talking about the progress of Zeppelin in February 1971, Robert Plant confirmed they had recorded 14 tracks for the album. Said Plant about it, with 14 tracks, we have enough for 2 albums, but we won't put a double album out. People can appreciate a single album more as there's only 8 tracks on it. Agree to disagree here. In my opinion, there's no such thing as too much Zeppelin. However, I do understand where Plant was coming from. It's hard to argue with how Zeppelin IV turned out. It is, after all, an unparalleled record. But the mention of 4 being a double album, that's a really interesting thought. And actually, for a brief moment, with the finished tracks mounting, Led Zeppelin did consider doubling it up. A lot of people don't know that. Page even toyed with the unconventional idea of releasing the record as 4 separate EPs. That would have been pretty cool. Obviously, as we know now, the double album idea would have to wait for physical graffiti as the leftover tracks were scattered to the wind. Actually, that's where many of them landed, along with Houses of the Holy and Coda. But the exclusion and the postponement of these tracks, it prompts an interesting what-if scenario here. What if Zeppelin had released them as part of 4? I mean, could it have worked? Or would these extra tracks have diluted the end product? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Let's have a great discussion here. Anyway, we all know what happened after the release of Zeppelin IV. Rock and roll changed forever. Soaring from the album's insane popularity, Led Zeppelin definitely secured their place in rock immortality. But in keeping with the band's evolutionary mindset, they were, determined not to repeat themselves. So when it came to 5, otherwise known as Houses of the Holy, Zeppelin, they took a sharp left turn. Said Jimmy about it, although everyone's clamoring for another Led Zeppelin IV, it's very dangerous to try and duplicate yourself. I won't name any names, but I'm sure you've heard bands that endlessly repeat themselves. After 4 or 5 albums, they just burn up. With us, you never knew it was coming. End of quote. Honestly, that's one of the many reasons why I love Zeppelin. so much, and why you do too. I mean, they were innovators. They were explorers. They were out to conquer new sonic horizons. And Houses of the Holy, it's the epitome of that mentality. Progressive rock, reggae, funk, folk, psychedelic, Indian, even straight up rock and roll.
Oh, darling, 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 walk a while with me. Dancing days are here again. I ain't gonna tell you nothing, I ain't gonna tell you no more with love. Sing into an ocean, I can hear the ocean's roar.
I mean, Houses of the Holy is an amalgamation of so many different styles. It gave us what Page would call an album of many moods. Now, this change in direction was a big risk for the band, although they didn't think of it in those kinds of terms. Plant would say, there was a lot of imagination on the record. I prefer it much more than the fourth album. I think it's much more varied. However, that wasn't a widespread opinion, mind you. And predictably, the criticism, it was pretty savage. Houses of the Holy outright dazed and confused tastemakers and fans alike when it was released in March of '73. Rolling Stone, always at the head of the mob, they denigrated it, calling it a limp blimp, one of the dullest and most confusing albums. Music World said it was a clunker, and Disco Music, they declared strangely sluggish and inconsistent. That's what they said about the album. I'll give them inconsistent, but then again, that was kind of the point. Unfazed, if not somewhat exasperated, Jimmy Page defended the album. He said, people still have this preconceived notion of what to expect. How they should approach our albums is to forget they ever heard of a band called Led Zeppelin. Forget about what they expect to hear and just listen to what's on that particular record. That's all we ask, but we don't get it. End of quote. Good point. Houses of the Holy, it ushered in the golden middle period of Zeppelin's catalog, which along with Physical Graffiti was essentially 3 albums worth of material. It was also a chapter that had John Paul Jones increasing his presence in the band's ever-evolving sound. There's no question that Houses of the Holy has stood the test of time. I mean, you can make a case for it just looking at the numbers alone. Worldwide, it sold over 12 million copies. That's a low estimate, by the way. Even at the time of its release, amid a firestorm of fire-breathing critics and doubting Thomases, Houses of the Holy, it made its mark, more than made its mark. The Houses of the Holy went top 10 around the world, mostly top 5, actually. Went to number 1 in both the UK and the US, and Australia and Canada. The record also reached number 4 in Sweden, Italy, Norway, and the Netherlands. Went to number 3 in Austria and Japan, and it went to number 2 in Finland. But this record, it doesn't need sales figures or chart rankings to validate it. The music itself, it's a testament to its greatness. I mean, in terms of sheer imagination and musical diversity and experimentation, House of the Holy, it's masterful. On the whole, Zeppelin's creative craftsmanship and unbounded imagination, they're on full display here. There's a lot to love, including today's spectacular track, No Quarter. So the song's beginnings, they go back to John Paul Jones, who created and recorded the chord progression. John also wrote some unpolished arrangements at his home studio. Said JP about it, it just came about sitting around the piano, using various effects. I knew instantly it was a very durable piece and something we could take on the road and really expand. Jonesy later played the demo for his bandmates during the sessions for their 4th album at Headley Grange. That's where Page, Plant, and Bonham, they loved it. They liked the mood of the composition, which actually at the time had a very fast rhythm. They all agreed that Jonesy was onto something really special, but they didn't feel like it was a fit for 4, so they locked it away in cold storage. Of course, later for the Houses of the Holy sessions, they defrosted it, and they got back to work on it. After Jonesy did some touching up, Page and Plant got more involved, incorporating their own ideas into the song. As we break down No Quarter, I do want to take a moment and thank our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear, the glasses I always wear. Make sure to click on the info button right up here to get the very best prices on eyewear. You can even do a virtual try-on before you buy to see exactly how you look. Click here to get up to 80% off regular retail prices. So without a doubt, No Quarter marks one of the high points in John Paul Jones's career, whose remarkable talents, let's be honest, sometimes take a backseat to his three bandmates. Still, No Quarter is a monolithic piece of evidence in the case of Jonesy's greatness as both a songwriter and a musician. Said engineer Eddie Kramer about it, who actually worked on Houses of the Holy, it wasn't just his brilliance as a keyboard player or even a writer. It was also the subtlety of his arrangements and the economy of notes that made the track such a powerful statement. Genius. Very well said indeed. Bursting with unorthodox electric piano, synth, and bass pedal lines, No Quarter unexpectedly shifts in melody and temperament. It places us as listeners at the heart of an uneasy, on-edge, even haunted atmosphere. It's a welcome venture into the realm of progressive rock. At times it feels as if you're sinking ever downward into a watery abyss, courtesy of Jones's underwater keyboard sound. Likewise, Robert Plant's voice is treated with various sound effects that reinforce the waterlogged sonics of this track. Plant's vocal, it's like a meditative dreamland, mixed with the strange and exotic tones of John Paul Jones's electric piano. Plant's haunting vocals, processed by a very pronounced phasing. The effect magnifies the eerie and menacing ambiance of the song. And Plant's interpretation, it's really somber, but very revealing. It's one of his most spine-curdling vocals ever. Truly haunting.
Close the door, put out the light.
Even the lyrics themselves have us marching through a storm, albeit one of a different sort of precipitation. It's a driving blizzard. Close the door, put out the light. You know they won't be home tonight. The snow falls hard, and don't you know, the winds of Thor are blowing cold.
The winds of Thor are blowing cold.
It is such an epic opening stanza. These lyrics go from 0 to 11 in just 4 sentences. Robert Plant perfectly sets the scene, stoking the imagination, dropping us as observers into the thick of the storm. It's as if you're there, commandeered for this devil-driven march across the frozen tundra.
The snow falls hard, and don't you know?
Plant's haggard lyrics truly give life to an anonymous band of messengers tasked with carrying news that must get through, no matter the cost. They hold no quarter. They ask no quarter. Now, this is a do-or-die quest, life or death, probably death. The words no quarter, they likely mean no mercy. It's a phrase that was used by pirates on the high seas as they targeted ships to plunder. In a different context, it was used by British soldiers in the American Revolution, meaning no prisoners. It was a death sentence, which is also alluded to in the lines, walking side by side with death, the devil mocks their every step.
Devil mocks their every step.
There's a good argument to be made that Robert Plant is invoking the images of Viking warriors in the song. The winds of Thor are blowing cold, and the dogs of doom are howling more. Now, both of these lines have ties to Norse mythology.
The dogs of doom are howling more.
Plus, there's also the repeated winter imagery, which colors the track. If this is the case, it wouldn't be the first time Plant had broached the subjects of Vikings in his lyrics. Notably, Robert penned the gloriously heavy-hitting Immigrant Song after playing a show in Iceland in June of '70. Viking references are all over that one. We've covered that in the past, of course. Some have also argued for a Tolkien-esque interpretation of the song. I think the Lord of the Rings connections are less clear-cut. Regardless of who exactly is chosen to walk that path where no one goes, we're right there with them the whole way through. Plant, he's a master poet, giving us a harrowing glimpse into this desolate winter landscape. Even though we're short on details, we can just feel the urgency of this heroic, against all odds mission. Their plight becomes our own, and we wouldn't have it any other way. So House of the Holy, it issued 2 singles, although No Quarter wasn't one of them. Getting the nod here was Over the Hills and Far Away, and Dear Maker.
Oh,
you got so much.
Still, No Quarter, like the bulk of Zeppelin's catalog, got more than his fair share of airtime on classic rock radio. But you know, where it really took center stage was, well, on the stage. No Quarter featured at every single Zeppelin show from 1973 up until the Nebworth Festival in 1979. It's a go-to live favorite. It was Jonesy's moment to shine as keyboardist extraordinaire. In fact, with John Paul in his element, live performances of No Quarter could reach up to 30 minutes, said Jones about it. It was a joy to get involved in those improvisations. Mind you, later on, they did begin to stretch to ridiculous proportions. With something like No Quarter, it was a test each night to see how it would work out. I mean, nothing was pre-planned. We took some chances, and sometimes we get a bit lost. But when that improvisation really worked, it was very satisfying. End of quote. Satisfying, yes, but also pretty awkward for Robert Plant. He had nothing to do during those instrumental intervals. Robert actually said that he had to learn how to snap his fingers properly since that looked quite jazzy. Other times when he was at a loss, he just used to sit cross-legged on the piano trying to look like an interested gnome. His words. Does anyone out there remember this? For those of you who were lucky enough to see Zeppelin and No Quarter live, tell us in the comments below what Robert was doing when he wasn't singing. It might be fun to share some of those stories below. Anyway, so since those days, as you might imagine, No Quarter has been covered a number of times. A short list of Zeppelin fans who have taken it on: Stone Temple Pilots, Nirvana, Great White, Tool, Fish, The Flaming Lips, and of course, Heart. So there's another No Quarter connection that I have to cover here, and I gotta warn you, there's some drama. And I'm not gonna take sides here, but it is an important part of Zeppelin, even if it happened after the band dissolved. Now, by the early 90s, any hope of a three-fourths Zeppelin reunion seemed pretty far-fetched. The great John Bonham had, of course, died in 1980, marking the end of the band and the start of three diverging careers. Of course, Zeppelin's Live Aid performance happened in '85. Wasn't one of their best, but it still was good to see Page, Plant, and Jones together again on stage. I think it was better than most people say it was. You had Phil Collins on drums. Story for another day. Over the better part of the next decade, though, the trio continued to hammer away at their own projects. By 1993, Page was collaborating with David Coverdale, and Plant was touring Fate of Nations. However, plans change, and when Robert received an offer from MTV to play their iconic Unplugged series, he in turn reached out to Jimmy Page. Said Plant about it, "When the MTV offer came, I really felt I couldn't do the Zeppelin numbers outside of a live gig on my own. So I felt it was the right time to ask Jimmy, and it was really fortuitous." End of quote. Events unfolded quickly, and Page and Plant decided to take their Unplugged performance to the next level. More than a straight acoustic performance, the pair opted to completely reinterpret the Zeppelin catalog. Recording in Wales at a London TV studio and in Morocco, the two were accompanied by an Egyptian ensemble, the London Metropolitan Orchestra. There was local Moroccan musicians as well. The long-awaited reunion between Page and Plant was condensed into a 90-minute unleaded MTV performance. Unleaded, that's what they called it. However, there was one notable musician that was missing: John Paul Jones. Rather than call in his former bandmates, Robert Plant, he elected to use his current rhythm section, drummer Michael Lee and bassist Charlie Jones. That's right, there was still a Jones on bass, but it wasn't John Paul. Adding insult to injury, Page and Plant chose to call the official name of the album No Quarter, Jimmy Page and Robert Plant Unleaded. Yeah. So not only did they not invite John Paul to participate, they also named the project after one of his most famed tracks, a Led Zeppelin song which was largely, his work. Plant would say that he just hadn't thought about inviting Jonesy at the time. He said, "We were gaining so much momentum from the loops and working with Charlie and Michael. Quite honestly, I for one wasn't thinking of John Paul Jones. It was its own thing before all that started to be an issue." And yeah, it was an issue. Maybe it was just a way to temper expectations of a Zeppelin reunion. It could be. But it wasn't handled very well, right? Leaving John Paul Jones out in the cold and out of the known, that was an ungracious oversight at best. Not only was Jonesy surprised that he had been excluded, but he hadn't even been told about it. He finally heard about the project from his accountant. Said Jones about it, "It was a bit unsettling seeing someone else play my bass and organ parts, to say the least. Calling it no quarter, that was also pretty baffling. I remember at the time being asked for my comments on No Quarter by a journalist. He was obviously referring to the unleaded project. I curtly replied that I considered it to be one of the best compositions that I'd written. It was a great shame, particularly after all we've been through together." End of quote. No Quarter, the album, that was released on October 31st, 1984. It consisted of 14 tracks on CD. I think it clocked in around 79 minutes. The collection contained tracks taken from 6 Zeppelin albums, a few new songs, and of course, it included No Quarter. Jones's exclusion from the project unfortunately strained ties and friendships, which, let's be honest, were already becoming pretty distant. It would take some time to heal. Robert Plant did say that he apologized to John Paul Jones, but that wouldn't stop Jones from getting some lighthearted payback. So let's jump ahead to January 12, 1995. The surviving members of Led Zeppelin were being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. This was just a couple of months after the release of Page and Plant's No Quarter. Jonesy, still smarting, called it a proud occasion, but a difficult one. Said, "I was determined to do it, though as for the acceptance speech, well, I did have that line ready."
Also, thank you, my friends, for finally remembering my phone number. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Short and sweet and to the point, Jones, he took a subtle dig at his bandmates in front of the world. But honestly, I think they had it coming. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Leave us a comment about Led Zeppelin and No Quarter, this haunting song. What are your memories of the song, of the album? What do you think of Houses of the Holy? What do you think about John Paul Jones and being left out of that reunion there? Let's have a great discussion below. If you like our content, we do invite you to subscribe below. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.